It's Ross Pollard and his bare facts. So bad, so bad. It's Ross Pollard with the bare facts.
Hi guys, welcome back to the Bare Facts podcast. If you want to follow me, it's the Bare Facts podcast on Instagram. We've got a very special guest. All our guests are special, actually. This lady is an extraordinary person. She's achieved something in the state of Victoria. She was the first to achieve it. She was the first intensive care flight paramedic to qualify at Air Ambulance Victoria. Her name is Michaela Malcolm. She's got lots of interesting stories and we're going to talk to her about them today. Michaela, thanks for joining the Bare Facts.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks for having me.
Michaela, where are you from?
I grew up in Marysville in northeast Victoria. A large property there between Marysville and Buxton on a outdoor education camp. And I grew up there where my dad was the director of outdoor education. And I spent a lot of my time in the outdoors when I wasn't at school. And it was a great way to be brought up. Loved it. And left Marysville when I was 17 to go to uni.
What did you go to uni to do?
I did a Bachelor of Science at Monash. That was a bit of an eye-opener coming from a small country town to Clayton, Monash campus, and living on campus.
Made roads and sort of that sort of thing?
Yeah, pretty much. But it was a good experience, and I enjoyed the study there. I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do at that time, but I had an interest in physiology, or particularly exercise physiology, and psychology at that time.
So what did you do? Did you finish the science degree? Did you go into anything? Or?
I did. I finished the science degree, and while I was finishing that, I was working part-time for a government agency that regulates the telecommunications in Australia. That was my first introduction to a office-based job in a city, and I soon came to realise that wasn't something that I was interested in doing. So, yes, I did finish the science degree. I majored in exercise physiology, and I did some sports psychology as well. About that time, probably a year after I finished, there was an advertisement for paramedics, and that was the Metropolitan Ambulance Service at that time. And I applied. I was initially unsuccessful, reapplied, and that was a successful application, and that was nearly 20 years ago now.
So training was through Monash?
It was Monash down at Frankston.
Yeah.
It was a diploma at the time, so we spent some time in a classroom and then worked with a clinical instructor on road for a period of time, consolidating and then returning back to the classroom. That took 3 years.
It was like an old apprenticeship, wasn't it? Because you were employed by Metropolitan Ambulance Service as it was then, and then so it was a good way to get people from lots of different backgrounds and age groups. Wasn't it?
That's right.
You were paid a wage.
Yeah, it was. I think it was fantastic. We had probably about 20, 25 people in the class, and they ranged from 25 years old to I think someone in their early 40s, and there was all sorts of people in there. There was a lot of tradies. There was an occupational therapist, a hairdresser. It was a real interesting mix of people that brought some really good experience or life experience to the job.
So where did you work? Where did you train? What areas of Melbourne?
I started in a Waverley branch in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. Was there for quite a few years, and then did the senior reserve paramedic, which took me sort of all around Melbourne, but mostly the eastern suburbs. I then did some on-call work at Healesville. That was a call branch at the time, which I really loved, and I really enjoyed the jobs that took me out into the more rural areas around that region. So, most of my time was spent in the eastern suburbs in about 10 years ago, I applied for and did the intensive care MICA course, and I did that at MICA 8 at Ringwood in the eastern suburbs again. I did my single responder training at MICA 5 at Box Hill, and then I wanted some extra experience and applied to work up at Wodonga on the single responder up there, which was fantastic. And I did that for a couple of years prior to applying for air ambulance.
So there's a theme of you're from the regionals, and you obviously like working in regional areas for ambulance.
I do, yeah. I think it's I really love that type of work. It's you're with patients for a long period of time. They can be quite complicated. You're often working outside your guideline. You're working with a really interesting mix of people, from volunteers through to other intensive care paramedics, and of course air ambulance as well. And I think just delivering really good clinical care to the people of rural Victoria is something that's really important to me.
So you've enjoyed so less resources, longer time with the patients, more time for them to potentially deteriorate. What is that? Why you focused and geared yourself towards getting onto air ambulance?
Yeah, I think so. It was. I enjoy the challenge, the problem solving. As you said, working with really unwell patients for long periods of time, working in difficult environments, and working with different types of people is something that I really enjoy. And that working up around Wodonga definitely set me up for my application for air ambulance.
What were the stages you had to go through to get onto air ambulance?
So the selection process went over around 6 months, and it involved a clinical exam. It involved some fitness testing. We did some abseiling to assess our work around heights. There was some swimming challenges. There was a walk and carry type scenario where we were to carry all the winch equipment within a certain time frame. That equipment can be quite heavy. I think it's around 42 kilograms.
So why do you do that?
So when we do overland and water winch through our work, and we need to be able to, once we're inserted into, say, a bush scenario, be able to carry all that equipment to the patient, set it up, and be able to, I guess, be physically capable enough to work with that equipment to get the patient out of where they are.
So did you get through your first application?
I did. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it was a long process. It was stressful, and it was probably one of the hardest things that I've done. I think the other thing I didn't mention was the scenario.
So what's the scenario?
So the scenario involves an unknown situation at the time. You're just given information as to where to time and where to turn up on the day, and then you are essentially dispatched to a job via radio. You have an ambulance, you have a ALS paramedic partner, and you're dispatched to a job. You get in the ambulance, you arrive at the scene. And my particular scenario involved it was dispatched as a multi-casualty incident. And when you arrive, there's a young adult that has been, that had significant burns, and then you're assessed on your treatment of that situation. The thing that makes it stressful is that there's, I'm not sure exactly how many people, but it felt like there was at least 20 or 30 people there with video cameras. You're hooked up to microphones. There's people with clipboards taking
So it's
notes.
like a simulation assessment.
Yeah, exactly. Incredibly stressful at the time with everyone watching you. Probably, like I said, one of the hardest things I've done.
So you're successful. You get through all the stages. What comes next?
So we complete a course through Monash, an aeromedical retrieval course.
That's a theoretical course, is it?
It is, correct. And that goes for 1 year. And then we start with a clinical instructor on the aircraft at Essendon. And that period is around, say, 3 to 4 months. And we work alongside another intensive care paramedic on the aircraft, consolidating what we've learnt during that period.
What did you find most challenging from going from road ambulance to air ambulance? What are some of the I mean, apart from the flying, what are some of the more factors that you have to consider?
I think the intensity of the work, the type of work that we're going to, maybe the types of, say, major trauma that it can be quite confronting. There's a large amount of people all working under duress. It's not dissimilar to working on road, but at a more intense level, I think, and also the logistics around the job. So there's a lot of stimulus. You're not just thinking about the job as you go into the job. You've got multiple radios, people requesting information. There might be conversations with the pilot and crew person about where we're landing, how we're going to do the job, weather implications, all those types of things. So it's very easy when you start out to become overwhelmed by all that information. And I think that's one of the main differences between working on road, is not just the responsibility of the clinical care, but all the logistical considerations around that as well. I think the other thing that's difficult is, of course, working by yourself in that type of environment. We often have a lot of help at the scene with the patient, which is fantastic, but often once we're in the aircraft and the doors are shut, it can be quite stressful looking after a critically unwell patient in those circumstances.
So by yourself, you mean what does the helicopter crew configuration consist of?
So in Victoria, we have one intensive care or MICA paramedic. We have a crew person and a pilot. So there's generally 3 of us that make up the crew. The crew person is able to help prepare equipment, prepare medications for us, but don't have any clinical input or assist with any clinical decisions. So often, once we're in the aircraft, we're the sole clinician looking after that patient.
Okay. And at the scene, you're also responsible for what happens?
We are, yeah. So we would be generally the senior clinician at those types of cases, and we work closely with Adult Retrieval Victoria, moving patients across the state, and the doctors through Adult Retrieval Victoria as well, and of course the MICA paramedics, ALS paramedics and volunteers that work on road as well.
You got any memorable jobs that you've found challenging?
Yeah, I think the most memorable job for me was about 3 weeks after I'd qualified. So it was about 3 weeks after working with a clinical instructor. And I was dispatched to a bloke in his early 30s who had been, essentially I think the information was hit by a tyre in a quarry. So very little information. When we arrived, we found that he'd actually been crushed between a large wheel and the chassis of a truck in a quarry, one of those really, really large trucks. I'm not sure what they're called. So
big force, far from Melbourne?
It wasn't a long way out of Melbourne. It was probably about a 15-minute flight, which ultimately was an advantage to his condition. When I met him, and he won't mind me mentioning his name, Trent, he's been great in allowing me to talk quite a bit about this case, and I've kept in contact with him and his family.
Was he conscious or unconscious?
He was conscious at the time. He was sitting up in an ambulance. He appeared to be in a state where he was probably going to deteriorate really quickly into cardiac arrest, but he was awake, attempting to talk to me.
Sorry, where's the tyre struck him? On his chest?
The tyre has struck him primarily on his chest.
Yeah.
So he appeared to have an isolated major chest injury.
And how heavy is that tyre, roughly, or how big?
I've got no idea. It would be probably a couple of 100 kilos.
Wow.
So a massive force
Yep.
has gone through him. And we moved through the procedures that we would normally do in that circumstance, and we made an attempt to intubate him via rapid sequence induction. So we give the patient drugs to essentially render them unconscious and paralyse them or stop them from breathing, and then we insert a breathing tube into their trachea.
So you're doing an elective procedure that
Correct.
normally only would be done by an anaesthetics doctor?
Correct. We do them, I guess, reasonably regularly, but it is a high-risk procedure that involves a lot of thinking and clinical decision-making prior to that, and that's all happening really quickly, obviously.
So you open the ambulance.
Yep.
Did you get a feel on the way to the job for how sick this gentleman was?
No, the information was limited. It sounded like an unusual job. I think workplace injuries can often be obviously quite serious. So I was concerned, but I didn't have a lot of information, so no. But when I opened that door and I saw him, my first thought was, this bloke's going to die.
So why? What are you seeing? Tell the general public, what sort of things are you seeing with this gentleman?
I'm seeing a young man sitting up. He is blue. His head is blue. He's extremely distressed. He's unable to breathe properly. He's unable to talk to me. His eyes are wide open. He's looking at me. And, yeah, the only way I can describe it is he's going to die. 1
foot in the grave and 1 foot on a banana peel?
Yeah.
Yep. So
not a great feeling.
So and you're trying to stay calm at this stage, aren't you? Because you're the senior clinician at that job.
Yes.
So, okay, so you said you've gone through some procedures and then you've gone through this elective procedure where you put him in a temporary coma and put a breathing tube in. That's to try and give him a rest and to help.
Correct. Yeah, give him a rest and take over his ventilation and provide oxygenation or extra oxygen for him.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
If you want to learn how to be extraordinary and achieve high success and a winning mindset, comment on this episode, Ice Bath, at the Barefax Podcast on YouTube or at the Barefax Podcast on Instagram, and I'll give you instant access to my latest ebook, The Top 10 Benefits of Ice Baths for Extraordinary Results. Tip 5 is my personal favourite. Let me know what your top tip is. Okay, so you've done that. Why isn't everything okay? What's going on?
Well, I didn't know. I didn't know what was going on. Often we do that and things work, or if they don't work, we make a few changes and, we're in a better position. But it didn't work.
Which part didn't work?
Well, all of it.
The drugs worked?
The drugs worked.
Tube went in the right hole?
The tube did go in the right hole, but we had trouble maintaining end-tidal CO2, so I guess the definitive measure of the tube being in the right hole.
And just for everyone, the end-tidal is the air that is expired out or the waste product in a way?
Yep. So that tells you that the tube is in the correct position and not in the esophagus.
So going into the lungs basically as opposed into going into the guts.
Correct.
Yep.
So the result from that was a little bit confusing, and that essentially resulted in us removing that tube.
Oh, God. And he's still paralysed at this stage?
Correct.
So he's not breathing for himself?
That's right. So we're not in a great place here. He's got very poor oxygen saturations because of his chest injury.
How are you feeling at this stage?
Surprised and incredibly stressed.
Bit of a knot in the tummy starting to form?
Yeah. Just concerned.
Yeah.
Just concerned that I had elected to perform a procedure that didn't appear to have worked, and I wasn't sure why.
And is that one of the things that you guys do a lot more elective procedures because of the flying involved and everything, but you're also taking on a huge risk, aren't you?
Correct.
So you've decided to go down this path. You've taken a big bite out of the sandwich, but the sandwich doesn't taste right, does it?
That's
Something's
right.
not going right.
Yep.
So what did you do next?
I had a bit of a think, and that felt like it took forever.
Bit of
but
a
it was
cry
probably
on the inside, perhaps?
no crying. Just trying to keep calm and work through the problem.
Yep.
I ended up inserting a different type of tube, I guess. I guess you would call it a backup solution, and not one that we would use regularly. I'd actually never used that device before.
Which was?
In real life. It was the intubating LMA that we had at the time.
Mm-hmm. And LMA is laryngeal mask airway?
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's it's not as effective as the tube we'd placed prior to that, but it was I guess, like I said, a backup solution. So not ideal, but a fix, or a temporary fix, I guess, to what was going on. So from there, a multitude of things happened, which compounded the stress. And
Which were?
so we were unable to place, I was unable to place him on the ventilator. It was alarming. I couldn't work out why. The oxygen, we ran out of oxygen at that point. There was a long move across to the aircraft. So I guess what I'm trying to explain is that there was a lot of things to think about at this point. So in my mind, I had a couple of options about how best to take or get this man to hospital. The flight was reasonably short, but I felt that I couldn't put him in the aircraft in a position where he was deteriorating. He continued to have really poor oxygen saturations, and I couldn't fix the problem.
And
So-
the ventilator is the breathing machine, yes?
It is, yeah.
And that's not working.
That's not working. And being some of the equipment that we use isn't familiar to the other paramedics at the scene, so I'm the only one that can fix that problem.
Yep.
So I've got a multitude of problems that only I can fix.
So he's trying to die in front of you, and you've got alarms going off as well?
Alarms, there was noise. I was trying to work out the best way to get him. Could we go by road? Did we need to fly him? Who else was at the scene who could help me, who could come in the aircraft?
Mm-hmm.
I'd also done a thoracostomy on him as well, which
What's
is...
that?
It's where we essentially cut down through the side of someone's chest wall into the chest cavity, where we can we put our finger inside, and we allow, the point of the procedure is to allow that lung to re-expand if it's in a collapsed state.
So you've got your chest wall and then the lung on the inside, and they normally rub together, don't they? But air's gotten in between them, yes?
They do.
And it's collapsing the lung.
That's correct. In this gentleman's case, the lung was collapsed on his right side, and when I performed the thoracostomy, a great rush of air came out of his chest cavity, which was also unusual. Not unusual in the fact that we often hear air or feel air or blood, see blood or have a good result from that type of intervention. But it was a great rush. I remember being quite astounded at the amount of air that came out of his chest cavity.
And did anything improve when you did that?
No.
Oh, God.
So things improved very slightly, but not to the point that I would have expected. And that caused further concern. So again, it's a procedure that only I, at that scene, was able to perform and make those decisions around. So there was a lot.
It's a surgical procedure, yes, that you're doing out in the field. So just for the listener, so oxygen saturations, so you and I sitting here, our oxygen saturations would be anywhere from 95, 96 to 100 out of 100, or 99 out of 100.
Correct.
What were this gentleman's saturations?
At this time, they were about 50.
Oh.
Yeah, so the interventions that we would normally do to improve those oxygen saturations weren't working, basically. And if they remained or deteriorated from there, it was likely that he was going to go into cardiac arrest.
So what do you do now? I mean, you're running out of You're running out of tricks, aren't you, in your kit bag?
I did. I was out of options. I was pretty anxious at this time. And I made the decision then that I was going to have to move him and put him in the aircraft and continue attempting to improve the state that he was in.
And what's your flight time from the scene to one of the trauma centres?
It was around 10 to 15 minutes, I think, so it was fairly short.
And just to compound that, these aircraft are not pressurised, are they? So
Correct.
For the listeners out there, that means that...
Well, it means that that potentially his oxygen saturations and his lung issue was going to worsen.
Get worse.
Yeah. So I made that decision and hoped that it was the right one. And I asked a senior MICA officer who was also on scene to jump on board and give me a hand on the way.
Mm-hmm.
So he hadn't been in the aircraft before, so that involved a whole lot of other, a briefing or very brief briefing, helping him get into the seatbelt, showing where equipment was, what we were going to do, form a little plan.
There's more.
There's more.
On your cognitive load too, isn't there?
There is. Notify the hospital. And just decide what I was going to do on the way.
Can you do much once you're strapped into the aircraft?
It makes it very difficult. So we do like to perform all interventions prior to getting in the aircraft that we can, obviously without delaying time on scene.
You can't just pull the helicopter over, can you?
No, no, it's not like an ambulance. When things go wrong, we can pull over and open the door or call for help or all that sort of thing. So it makes it very difficult. Moving around in the back of the aircraft is difficult. We need to be have our belts on and takeoff and landing.
Plus you're wearing helmets?
We've got helmets on. It's noisy. It's now night time. So we've got lighting or darkness. There's lots of vibrations. There's not a lot of space to put equipment. Often you'll put something on the floor, it will vibrate away. You'll never see it again.
You just need the Benny Hill music playing in the background.
Yeah.
It's complete.
It felt like it.
Yeah. How did the flight go?
So we were really busy in flight. We decided to hand ventilate him. The ventilator was causing too much concern. We could perform the same skill essentially by using manual ventilation in this point.
Simple.
Correct. So the MICA paramedic was doing that while I continued to, we call it re-sweep or reinsert our finger into the thoracostomy site in his chest. So every time I did that, his oxygen saturations would improve very slightly and then they would plummet again. So I was continuously having to have my hand inside this patient's.
So we mentioned before that normal oxygen saturations, you'd be happy with sort of anything over 95 or 95 out of 100. What's he sitting at as you're flying? Is he still around the 50s?
Yeah, 50, 45. Yep, not ideal.
And those are the levels, really, aren't they, where someone is going to go in? Did his heart rate deteriorate or what was his heart rate doing?
His heart rate was around 130, 140.
God. And his blood pressure?
And his blood pressure was very good.
Okay.
We had no problems there. So I think having otherwise good perfusion is probably what ended up being a really good thing for him.
So what are you thinking at this stage? Like, you don't have all the diagnostic tools a hospital has, but what are you thinking on the way? Did he have was it bruising to his chest? What was causing these really bad oxygen levels?
I didn't have a lot of time to think, or think outside the square, I guess, at that moment. And in that moment, it doesn't matter, does it?
No.
You've got certain interventions that you need to do to improve the situation. So you stick with those. As long as you keep checking all of those things and make sure you're not missing anything, then coming up with an actual diagnosis isn't necessarily useful.
Do you have in the back of your mind that a lot of the patients you go to are trauma patients, yes?
Yeah, a lot of them are.
And they're significant traumas. So they're rural, as you say, farming, workplace, high-speed accidents on country roads. I don't know if you call it a comforting factor, but do you have it in the back of your mind that this injury could be so severe, I'm just going to have to do the best I can and it may not work?
Yeah, definitely. That's what I thought with this particular patient. I expected him to... in my mind, it was a non-survivable injury.
Right. So you're basically treating water until it sinks.
Correct.
Okay. So which hospital did you go to?
We went to the Alfred.
So the Alfred is the major trauma, one of the major trauma centres in the Southern Hemisphere,
Correct.
which is in Paran. Very good reputation.
Excellent hospital. Yep.
You land. What's going on? What's going on with the patient? Who's there to greet you? Have you got a cast of 1,000?
Yeah, we had a lot of people meet us at the helipad. I'd tried to communicate my concerns and obviously describing the patient's injury and current condition, as well as those concerns. We had the right people there at the right time. Not sure how many people.
But you can't even just open that. You can't even just turn the engine off, can you? Like, is there a sequence where you've got to wait for the helicopter to stop, then you've got to take your helmets and everything off and then get
Correct.
out?
Yeah, so once we land, there's roughly a 2-minute shutdown, and that gives you time to prepare anything, move equipment around, and that seemed to take a long time to happen. So once the aircraft shuts down, you're then able to open the doors and the Alfred staff can come out onto the helipad and meet you, which they did.
And then what happened? You went into the hospital and then you handed the patient over to them?
I did. So continually resweeping the thoracostomy site to try and maintain some sort of, adequate, I guess, oxygen saturations or inadequate, and handed over to the staff.
How many staff are in the trauma cubicle while you're doing it?
There'd have to have been at least 20, probably more. I think it felt like a lot of people.
And is that hard too, because you're trying to paint a clear picture yet, and I'm sure all the staff meanwhile, but the staff also want to get in and try and start treating the patient? Yeah,
it is difficult, but I think we need to remember that this patient is constantly deteriorating and is on the brink of cardiac arrest, essentially, and has been for some time. So
your handover is just the basics, just the main points, just the executive summary? Yeah,
look, I actually can't remember what I said. I was pretty exhausted. Just the brief facts and the obviously the immediate concerns that I had at that point, and pertinent information that they needed right then and there. And then I would have supplemented that handover a bit later on when I was able to have a proper chat with one of the staff.
So what did they find? What was causing these terrible numbers on this poor patient?
They found that he had a large hole in his right main bronchus.
Can you tell the listeners what that means?
So the right main bronchus comes off your trachea, so what people would call the windpipe, I guess, so where your air goes down into the lungs. And that the trachea branches off into the left and right bronchus, so two, I guess, reasonably large tubes that then become smaller branches down into your lungs to oxygenate the lungs, essentially. So the crush from between the wheel and the chassis had probably created such internal force that it's ruptured one of his main I guess, pipes. So air wasn't able to get down into his lung.
So it's just getting blown everywhere but where it needs to go.
It was, yeah. So the air was actually going into his chest cavity, into his lung. So that's why his lung was collapsed. It was not expanding. And why every time I put my finger into his chest cavity, a large amount of air would come out and we'd get a brief improvement in condition that would rapidly deteriorate.
So you're sending in the good stuff, the good oxygen into him, but it's getting diverted, going in the wrong spot, and then you're, indirectly then letting it out the side of his chest.
It is, yeah, exactly.
So is that surgery to repair that bronchus?
Yeah, so John Maloney was on scene. Sorry, not on scene.
John Maloney is?
John Maloney is the head of anaesthetics at the Alfred Hospital.
Yep.
And he was in the cubicle when I handed over the patient, and he ended up intubating the left lung only, and the hole in Trent's bronchus was later surgically repaired. Yeah, it was a really interesting case. John and myself have actually prepared a journal article about it. That's how interesting and unusual. It's usually a non-survivable injury.
So the force is great enough to bloody rupture one of his lungs away from the main pipes. What other injuries did he have with that force?
That was essentially it. That was the main injury.
Broken ribs?
I can't actually recall.
Okay.
Yeah, but that was his main injury.
But that sort of force, I mean, that could shear one of his vessels, couldn't it? It could have killed him outright.
Yeah. Yeah, he's lucky to be alive. So he has returned home with no cognitive deficits.
Family?
Yeah, family, lovely wife, and 3 children. And his wife had actually just given birth to their youngest one 6 weeks prior to the workplace accident in the back of an ambulance.
So how does that make you feel?
I was very pleased when I found out that he was going to survive. I guess I was proud to be part of that process. I reflected quite heavily on my clinical decisions that night and spoke to a lot of people about that case. But as I said, I've kept in contact with him, and it's been really lovely. I've since met him in hospital and then at a couple of other events, and I was just rapt that, you know, he's been able to survive that injury and get back to his family.
So obviously it's a team effort, but it must be very nice for you to be part of that team or that cycle of people that have made sure that he stays alive and he can live old with his wife and his kids.
That's right. It's incredible, and I think that's one of the best things about the job is working in these teams, and it's seeing a group of people with a variety of skills come together to do something amazing. And even though I may have ultimately delivered him to the hospital, I couldn't have done that job without the help of the other Micah paramedics there, the ALS paramedics, the pilot who was able to, land in a quarry, and my crew person who was just working his guts out, getting equipment, setting up equipment. You know, it was such a dynamic scene. It was just incredible to see that group of people come together to essentially look after that man. Like, it was just amazing.
Yeah. So technically, I know there are other ladies that work at Air Ambulance on the helicopter. How many of you are there now?
There's 4 Micah paramedics.
Yeah.
And we've got a number of ALS flight paramedics as well there that were working there long before I and Sarah came along.
So that's pretty special, yes?
Yeah, it's great.
How many paramedics are there in Victoria? 3,000 perhaps? 3,000, 4,000?
Yeah, I'd say that.
And then there's a good mix now, isn't there, of male and female? I think it's about 50-50 or maybe even a little more in the females.
I think it might be a little bit more.
And then you go to Micah, which is an even smaller one.
Yep.
And then Air Micah, which is, 2% of the workforce in total?
Yep.
And you're one of only 4. That's pretty special.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
It's not something that I set out to achieve from a gender perspective.
No. I guess what I'm saying is it's a terrific motivator to young females out there that you can do anything you want to.
Yeah, and I think that's true. It doesn't matter whether you're male or female. You can, if you put your mind to it, to a goal and work hard towards it, you should be able to achieve it.
So what are the things you love most about working at Air Ambulance?
I think I like working with it's a great group of colleagues, really supportive, excellent clinicians who really look after their patients. I think they're a really amazing group of people, and I love working alongside them. And I think it's a real privilege to be part of Air Ambulance and provide that level of clinical care to the people of Victoria. I know that might sound a bit strange, but it's true. I think it's very satisfying to go out and deliver that level of care, which is really quite high compared to other ambulance services in the world, and look after people and participate or contribute to changing people's lives.
Is there anything about air ambulance you don't like? Or are there things that you find difficult?
I think the work can be difficult at times. I think that not specifically air ambulance, but I think ambulance in general. There's a lot of changes underway in regards to culture, and I would like to see better psychological support for people and my colleagues. There's many of my colleagues who have suffered, psychological distress, mental illness because of our job, and I'd like to see that improve in particular.
What does one do when they're not going to people that have had their lungs ripped in half?
As in my spare time?
Yeah. How do you... I'll be a bit more specific. What do you do to escape work?
I spend a lot of time in the bush.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up on an outdoor education camp, I was always, involved in doing all sorts of things in the bush: bike riding, camping, horse riding, a bit of rock climbing. Yeah. Anything outdoors I really love. And so I do a lot of, I try to do a lot of mountain biking. Just spent some time in Tasmania, 10 days on the track on the overland, doing some hiking. In winter I like to do some skiing, go camping, four-wheel driving, anything in the bush, and I'm in the mountains and I'm pretty happy.
Michaela Malcolm, thanks for joining the Bare Facts today. Congratulations on your achievements. We look forward to hearing from you again, and thank you for your service to the Victorian public.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks for having me. That was great.
Guys, if you want to learn more about Michaela, the Bare Facts podcast on Instagram, there will be some more information and there will be some photos of her in action. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for listening today. We're glad you could join us. For more information on today's episode, previous episodes and upcoming episodes, please go to @the-Bare-Facts podcast on Instagram. Also our YouTube channel, The Bare Facts Podcast with Ross Pollard, as well as Facebook, The Bare Facts. And please get in contact with us. If you are an extraordinary person, you know an extraordinary person, or you've been in an extraordinary situation.